Well, hello there, Broncos country, and welcome in for another great episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, is Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, doing well. Been socially distancing for quite some time, but we're bringing us all together virtually today. So working from home, we'll see what's happening. Got things ramping up at the hospital now, but we'll see. It's a ever-changing situation. But man, it was kind of nice to have a little bit of normalcy, and that is free agency and the schedule that is you and I talking another episode of Building the Broncos on a Tuesday night.
Yeah, it is nice to at least have a little bit of normalcy. And I know there's a lot of people questioning why the NFL was going to go ahead with their free agency season. I'm sitting here going, man, this is like the perfect time for the NFL to cash in with every eye of sports just being in, because what else is you going to watch? I mean, I watched, you see that clip of the people watching bowling?
Yeah.
Going nuts. Yeah.
Yep. Well, right now outside my apartment, I can see people and they're playing spike ball right now.
Are they?
Probably a couple of roommates. Have you ever seen spike ball?
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm really jealous. I'm socially distancing, so I'm not going to touch that little ball out there, but making me jealous. Actually went on a couple of walks with the wife. So been doing okay, but just, again, like you said, a little bit of normalcy as regard to the football landscape and free agency.
Yep. And where's Carl? I'm here. I just don't have my glasses, don't have my hair. I was kind of running from one place to the next today. So I'm sorry you guys aren't getting my done up look today. So you just have to look at Nick, I guess, is the way this is going to have to go today. But we got lots to get to. Plenty that's been going on with free agency, maybe not with the Broncos as much, but hey, we're going to tell you why that's not the worst thing in the world. And so make sure that you're following us on Twitter, because that's where we post all the time. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH, and the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts if you're not seeing this live here today. And also make sure you're heading over to milehighhuddle.com of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. We're going to have lots of content for you guys over the next couple of weeks. I mean, this is our go time. So very, very excited. But also know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Okay. Let's get into this here a little bit. Why is it a bad thing the Broncos have been silent? Why is it a good thing?
Okay. Well, the bad thing is that everybody's sitting here on their phone on social media, even more than probably ever before, and wanting to see the Broncos make some moves. And you see teams like Miami, teams like, the Eagles have made a couple good moves. The Raiders have signed two of the more prominent linebackers in this class. So it feels like, the Broncos, all this hype about having this extra cap space, yada, yada. What are they doing right now? They've signed one player so far, and they missed out on another one that's been being hyped up as one of their top targets in DJ Reader. So again, that makes it a little bit frustrating. And, there's no other way around it. You want those guys, and at the moment it's the shiny thing. But also free agency, typically you don't see the teams that are hauling in these best guys making record-breaking contracts as the teams that are the ones that really are the competing teams. Typically the teams that can turn these things around and are the best teams year after years, they don't use free agency to build their team. They use it to complement their team. And then how these teams are built is via the draft and development of those players in the draft. So while it is frustrating that, again, the Broncos haven't made a ton of significant moves, when you have, some other second wave BC level free agents where you can bring and fill out the roster so you don't have these glaring holes, and then you can have those players from the 2018 draft, the 2019 draft, and the 2020 draft kind of step up their game. That's probably the best methodology year after year, how teams are built. Now, that being said, would it have been nice if they walked out today with DJ Reader, and we could be talking about that as the Broncos bringing in this nose tackle / all across the defensive line player that can anchor them down? Absolutely. I wish that was the case, but alas, $13 million a year, record-breaking nose tackle, and the cap not being as big, at least expanding as much as they thought. Only $9 million, I believe it was. Maybe it was $7 million. So again, maybe it's not the worst thing.
Right. I always tell people in free agency, you have to have patience. Wait for the entire picture to show up before we really make judgments. I know it's hard to see all these players flying off the board we're going to talk about some of the AFC West and what they've been doing. I mean, Chargers have rebuilt their offensive line. Raiders are rebuilding their defense. Chiefs have been silent, but that was kind of expected. They didn't have any cap space anyway, and they're trying to work on some of their own guys to get them done long term. But it's the smart teams usually wait for the second and third wave of free agency where they get more deals that are actually more in line with the play of the player. I know, again, people want the big names. They thought, hey, we got this rookie quarterback we can go out and spend. I would say the Broncos have spent. I mean, you look at they traded for Bouye, who at this point you're kind of going, wow, that's a nice discount that he's playing at. Of course, going out and getting Glasgow, I would say the top interior offensive lineman on the market.
After Scherf and Thuney were taken off, I agree.
Right, exactly. So then he becomes top guy. And I thought actually his deal, you would expect for being the top guy that he would reset the market. Broncos actually got him. He's only the 7th highest paid guard or something like that in the NFL, and he ranked as a top 10 offensive guard last year. So it's right in line with where he plays. And then, of course, getting Justin Simmons, where you're keeping him. So, I mean, the Broncos have made 3 really big deals. It's just hard because they've been so spaced out that we kind of forget about them when they're not in this 2-day period. And so, again, just show some patience. There's a lot of defensive linemen. We're going to go over a list here pretty soon of just guys. I mean, I already see some in the announcements or in the comments here of guys that the people are talking about, even the Broncos' own guys that haven't gotten contracts yet. So again, it's just, you have to have patience. And I know that is so hard in today's world. I'm as bad as anybody. I'm sitting there with Twitter going reset, refresh. And I'm sure a lot of you are as well. And so like I said, we're going to talk through this. We're going to work through this together. That's what we got to do. We got to be unified together as Bronco fans, especially in a time like this. And so let's help each other out here. All right, Nick, let's talk a little bit of AFC West here then. Or do you want to get some comments here? Because I know we see a lot of names being listed.
Well, where my computer is a little bit shaky if I start typing and picking some. So if you would pick one, that we can get at it. But AFC West, I guess the biggest thing that we should talk about right now is Tom Brady. It sounded like it was going to come down to the Los Angeles Chargers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, Brady's heading to the NFC South. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which, man, you want to say 2020 is the bizarro world, weirdest timeline. Here we are, Tampa Bay Buccaneers of all the teams to sign Tom Brady. Granted, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Bruce Arians, they got some pieces there that'll make it interesting. But really, that's going to be interesting. It's going to be crazy to see what the Chargers do at quarterback now. Maybe a guy like Jameis Winston. Maybe they go quarterback. Fingers crossed, honestly, that the Chargers are looking to go quarterback that early because it can push down somebody to the Broncos because Broncos aren't taking quarterback at 15. But really, that's probably the biggest story in regards to the AFC West right now is the Chargers. They were making overtures really close to getting Brady. Brady's going to Tampa Bay.
I'll take it. All right. Well, Kareem came in with this one. I thought this is a really good question here. Appreciate it, Kareem. Why did the Broncos let McGovern walk? How much of an upgrade is Glasgow?
Well, it sounds like Glasgow is actually going to be playing right guard. So I think the versatility is key. It's really nice to get a guy that can play. I mean, two years ago, he played left guard, or 3 years ago, he played left guard. Then he played center the next year. And this past year, he played right guard. So Broncos could have needs at center, at right guard. But it does sound like, coming out from people that are connected to the Broncos, the plan is to play Glasgow at right guard, which, okay, that's fine. That means that Wilkinson is probably kicked into that reserve role, which you might need considering Garrett Bowles' sporadic play and Juwan James's sporadic health. But that means center is really a question right now. I think that they didn't want to spend all their money on the interior offensive line in this cycle. I mean, that's not always the best use of resources. You got a solid one in Glasgow. Now it's up to Munchak to kind of find else what you have there. So is that going to be Schlottman? Is that going to be Patrick Morris? Is that going to be a rookie? I mean, this is a pretty good center draft class. Not the best guard class, but a good center class. So that's something after free agency is over, we can definitely dig into that because the needs are going to be a little bit more obvious. But right now, that seems like that's direction. So losing McGovern, it kind of stinks. That being said, you don't want to spend that much money, I think, on that interior offensive line. And especially, you still have needs on the defensive line, cornerback, etc. So it makes sense. And we'll see what happens, how it kind of all falls in regards to comp picks.
Yeah. All right. James Mass comes in with this comment. Thank you. I really appreciate the donation here. He says, just because these players are valued as top tier doesn't mean the Broncos view them like that. they probably view their own players higher and maybe want to sign them instead. Let me start off. You're right. If a player is hitting free agency, it probably means the team didn't value them as much as they always say, you're paying A+ money for B+ or B talent when it comes to free agency. You're not seeing the A+ guys usually hit the market.
Unless you're Dallas and leave three of your biggest guys at the market at the same time.
Exactly. So every once in a while you get something like that. But for the most part, you're not seeing the top tier talent ever hit the market. That's teams work to sign those players. That's why the Chiefs are working really hard to figure out a way that they can get Mahomes and Chris Jones both signed to their team. It's why you saw so many free agency tags or franchise tags this year. Teams are trying to keep that talent in-house. And so, again, these are not the top tier players that we're really looking at. And so when you're talking about DJ Reader getting that $13.25 million a year, is he actually worth that? I still keep coming back to the Jaguars model. They've done this like every about 2 to 3 years. They go into they just did it this year, where they go pay huge money. Everybody's like all excited of Jaguars. Look what they're doing. And then 2 years later, they're cutting all the players they just signed those huge deals to. And so, again, sometimes the best thing you can do as a team is just wait, be patient, be disciplined. And I know that's not always easy, but it is. You want to be as disciplined as possible and just understand you're going to lose out on some players, but it's going to mean then you can spend money in other areas. So like right now, let's say because they didn't go get DJ Reader, they can sign Wolf, and maybe now they have enough money, instead of getting Prince Amukamara, they can go get Chris Harris. I doubt that happens, but I'm just saying now all of a sudden you have money where you're going from $13.5 million to your top defensive lineman to about $8 million. Well, that gives you that extra $5 million to go somewhere else. And so This is why, again, I emphasize so much, wait for the full picture, because now they can really round out this entire roster and have depth. Last year, how many times did we talk about how this team just had no depth? And when one starter went down, it was bad.
Yeah. And I do want to point out this comment here from George Rivera. Only successful years on Elway's resume was when he broke the bank with a lot of splashy signings. Stop making excuses for the lack of activity. I hear what you're saying. It's definitely easy to say that in the moment, but this is not a one-for-one comparison. When the Broncos had Peyton Manning, they were able to get guys wanted to come here. This is a chance to play with one of the best ever. And you had guys taking arguably discounts to come here and also stay here. Derek Wolfe, Chris Harris Jr. So while, a lot of people are excited about Drew Lock, it's not like the chance to play with Peyton Manning. So I don't think that's a one-for-one comparison. And again, you saw the Broncos signing guys for deals that were considered lower than what you think they'd get on the open market then. So again, maybe if Drew Lock kills it next year and the Broncos still have this cap space, then maybe a year from now we'll be talking about it. In that regard, we can get some sort of bargains, but I don't really think that is the case this season. So again, a little frustrating, especially with, tough season. Oh, we're going to have all this cap room. Well, a lot of that cap room disappeared pretty quickly. AJ Boye, like you talked about, paying Glasgow $11 million a year, and Flacco still on the roster, which is something we can talk about coming up here, the reason for that and everything. But it's going to be interesting. It's frustrating, but there's still guys out there. And again, free agency is about filling out your holes, not getting stars as best you can. And then the best talent you're going to get is via the draft and those guys taking that first to second year step, that second to third year step. Right.
Well, you look at the Broncos last year, they spent the majority of their money on 3 players. Well, 2 of those players missed pretty much the entire season.
So there's your free agent signings.
Yeah.
You get that
and you're getting those players back this year, hopefully. So we'll see how that plays out for the Broncos. Hopefully. It kind of makes this 2020 class even a little bit bigger in the sense of what we'd actually be getting compared to what we had last year. But it is still, you look at that, if you compound it down to just a few players, well, then you put a lot of eggs in one basket and hope this works out. Yeah. Or if you space it out, sometimes it can work out better where you can find those diamonds in the rough. And a Fangio defense, let's think about this too. He has taken a lot of guys that in other systems were average at best and turned them into high functioning players. I think of a Prince Amukamara as one that all of a sudden he goes and becomes one of the top cornerbacks in football. You think about the defensive linemen that they had that all of a sudden become stars in that defense. And so again, I want to see how this all plays out, who they end up getting in the end, and then make my judgment on how I feel they built this roster. Because there's just so many players still on the market that it's hard to know exactly what's going to happen here.
Yeah, and I mean, if maybe while we're talking about this, something will come out. So I do want to talk about the Broncos here going off here. It looks like an awesome Clint Eastwood picture there. I'm tired of being patient. Who the heck is going to cover Kelce and Waller? Shake my head. Broncos actually last year were, despite the games against Kelce and Waller, which again were frustrating, you saw a step up against tight ends last season. Now, that being said, it is an area of concern. The Broncos didn't walk out with one of the top linebackers. They didn't walk out with Littleton. They didn't walk out with Schobert, Kwiatkowski, Kirksey, Blake Martinez, et cetera, but Broncos linebacker play improved tremendously last year once you kind of had that duo of Todd Davis and Alexander Johnson solidified. I mean, if you recall, at the beginning of the year, the linebackers looked pretty darn terrible. Corey Nelson, probably some of the worst linebacker play I watched last season, and Josie Jewell looks like a guy who solid backup, not a good starter. So once Davis and Johnson kind of got solidified, it'd get better. And then also you had the nuanced answer from Vic Fangio at the Combine where Broncos are going to play more 6 defensive back sets this season. So look for them to kind of use a more holistic offensive or defensive scheme approach to help negate some of those tight end issues. And again, this isn't the end of it. Maybe you're not going to get that big signing at linebacker, but this is a pretty solid linebacker class in that top 100. So the Broncos have a 2nd-round pick and 3 third-round picks. They have a chance to get a solid linebacker in those range in this season. Right. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there.
Right. Well, Michelle Parker coming in with a super chat. Really appreciate it. Elvis, I'm guessing Elway screwed up free agency.
It's too early to say. You don't screw up free agency. I just want to say this. You don't screw up by free agency by not being active in it. You screw up free agency by blowing your wad on the wrong person. That's how you screw up free agency. You don't know that until hindsight.
Right. How many times did Washington win free agency?
Gosh, every year. Every year.
And they've been one of the worst run organizations in football. Jacksonville, again, is another that I point to. The Raiders, there for a while when they were really trying to push at the end of Al Davis's life, they would go spend big money on players that never panned out. And so free agency is just as much kind of a crapshoot as that of the draft sometimes. If you're really depending on some players taking a step up and you're paying them for past production, not always what they're going to be doing. And so it's just, and free agency officially has not even started.
No, tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow, 4:00 Eastern time, I think. So 2:00 Mountain time, 3:00 our time. So we've even seen sometimes where players regretted their decision to sign with one team and decided to go to another. I'm not saying that's going to happen here, but let's see what happens over the next few days here, the next couple weeks. I think, Emmanuel Sanders, he was a week into free agency before he was signed, right?
I believe so. He was not super hyped, but and also was going to go to the Chiefs and backed out to go play with Manning. So interesting.
So some of I know Evan Mathis was another one the Broncos signed late that ended up being a huge signing for him in their Super Bowl run. So sometimes it's actually been the later signings that have actually panned out the most for the Broncos. And who's to say the Broncos don't make a trade at some point as well?
Yeah. And before we get too far down this line, you can maybe search the comments here for anything interesting that stands out. But I think an interesting topic we should talk about is Andy Janovich. Carl, apparently a lot of people think that's Carl's doppelganger. So sorry to hear that, Carl. But the Broncos moved Andy Janovich for a 2021 7th-round pick. I think that has a lot to do with guys, just the value of a fullback. It's a dying position. You call it as you want. It's a position that you're not going to get a lot for. There's not many teams that are looking for it. So you had Stefanski, who's now the coach for the Cleveland Browns, coming from the Minnesota Vikings underneath Gary Kubiak. That's a guy that's going to use the fullback. But with Patrick Shermer, fullback is a position that they're not really looking to use. So I think that Jano is gone, and that's, he's a fan favorite, but let's put it in perspective. He is a fullback. And again, good comment here by John Prescott. Once Shermer was here, it was clear Jano was on a timer. That's true. And the biggest thing you're going to miss with Jano is the special teams impact. That's true. He's a big special teams player, but a guy like Andrew Beck, which we even saw last year in that Texans game, he's kind of that H-back, fullback, tight end hybrid that makes so much more sense with the scheme because he is much better of a passing threat, a pass catching threat. So it does stink for Jano to be gone, but I think that this speaks as high. I mean, I think it was Elway brought up Andrew Beck unprompted at the combine as well. So the Broncos like this guy. Granted, he's still just a fullback tight end kind of hybrid. It's not, we're not talking a true difference maker, but they like him and it makes sense.
Right. And then you were talking about Joe Flacco earlier. Flacco probably going to June 1st cut, less dead money hit.
I think the dead money is the same. It's just spread out differently. Maybe I could be wrong on that.
Well, it'd be over 2 seasons instead of 1.
Yeah.
And so the Broncos would open up and it becomes less because you have so much more cap space the next season. So on a dollar for dollar value, that's why you like those post June 1st cuts, because it ends up making less of an impact really overall.
So Carl, why isn't Flacco gone yet?
So 1, he has not passed his medical test. If the Broncos cut him right now, they would owe him a medical
grievance.
Right. And then they can't do this post June 1st cut if they do that. There's just a lot of implications that come with that. Also, they can't really officially cut him until the league year starts. And right now, when people can't travel, that's the other thing, when we can't get a medical check done anyway.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I would add here is the Broncos, you have to remember, they're going to have to spend $10 million on the draft class, and they're going to probably want $5 to $10 million of emergency money available as well. That's Joe Flacco's contract. So right now that money's already been spent anyway. So they can just spend up to the cap of what they have and then cut Joe Flacco, and that opens it up for the draft and everything else. So you have to operate with the idea that Joe Flacco's money is already gone to other players that the Broncos are going to have anyway. So yeah. I know it's nice to think that you have this $80 million in cap space, but the reality is when you got $10 million for, like I said, your draft class, you got $10 million for emergency money, that money starts disappearing very quickly. And then when you sign a couple of these players, it just really doesn't take too long before your free agency money disappears pretty quickly. Now you have these teams that design contracts that push the money to later years, but then they find themselves, yeah, exactly. And so you have to pay for it someday. And that always comes back to hurt teams quite a bit. So all those things kind of keep in mind when you're talking about it. All right, we got a couple super chats that have come in here. One from Joseph Carson Jr. says, I know Shermer is not a fan of fullbacks, but losing Janovich sucks. Best of luck to him. It does. I mean, he's a guy you love to cheer for. He's a try-hard guy, always out there smashing people. You love that smash mouth football. I mean, I love the idea that he was breaking face masks because he was hitting people so hard. There's a lot of run plays that were opened up because he was on the field.
Yeah.
But you're right there, Joseph.
Do you think his truck is going to be able to make it to Cleveland? Is that rusty old truck that
are they going to let him cross state lines? I don't know. Yeah. We'll see.
That's a different question.
I know. Well, let's not get into that too much here. But yeah, you're right. It just doesn't fit the offense and what the Broncos are going to be doing. And so it would be an extra roster spot. And when Andrew Beck proved to be a competent fullback, I would say,
for what they're going to ask him to do in those limited roles.
Yeah. And obviously proved that he can play that tight end role as well. So when you got that multi-dimensional tool like that, you like to use it. So I appreciate the comment there, Joseph. And then we got one coming in here from Brian Greenfield. Really appreciate it. And all of you that are here, I know we're trying to get as many questions. We talk way too much. But Reader was too expensive. Purcell almost as good. But dang, wanted Littleton, not stoked about the Bouye trade. Would rather paid $60 million a year to Jones. Hope we go after Trufant. Don't want other defensive backs except Bosby. So a lot to unpack there.
You have to think about it where the Bouye trade, you're playing with a little bit of house money with that fourth. And odds are with Chris Harris Jr., it's not just getting Bouye. You're getting a pick next year as well, most likely with how these contracts are setting up right now. So I understand that you'd rather just get Bouye or Byron Jones instead of Bouye. But Bouye, you're 13.5 compared to the 16, which again, we're not exactly sure how the contract structure is. We'll see once those are updated on the spot track and everything, which does matter. I mean, they have a lot of flexibility with the Bouye contract, no guaranteed money. So
right.
There's other aspects there than just that 13.5 versus 16 in play. And the Broncos, it does seem like they're setting themselves up to haul in some comp picks next year as well with some of the structure. So
right.
We'll see what happens, but I don't I understand wanting Byron Jones, and why would the Dolphins get rid of Minkah Fitzpatrick just to bring in Byron Jones, who's kind of different, similar kind of molds there. But I don't know. We'll find out. The Dolphins are weird. But
then, Reader was too expensive. Purcell almost as good. I would say Reader brought a little bit more of a pass rush option.
Much more, I think. Versatility too.
Right.
Purcell was just playing 0-1. Reader, you playing from 5 technique down to 0.
Right. But you are right. The price got to a point where you have to be smart.
Yep.
And when you're talking over 13 million, I'm sorry, that's just not worth it. When you could go get you could probably get Michael Pierce and Derek Wolfe done for maybe just a little bit more than that combined.
Probably
we'll see.
16.
So
13 to 16.
And then wanted Littleton. Yeah, that would have been nice.
I wanted Schobert, but
yeah,
what can you do? That's life. And now the Broncos can potentially look for one in the draft class. It's like I said, we talked about it. It's a good one. So I guess we should talk about now some of these options, since we are talking about all these guys. Some of the best. There are still a good number of defensive linemen available out there. So the Broncos, just because they have not signed another one, they lost out on DJ Reader with a decent amount of money. I guess that's the difference maker in the end. But you still have Michael Pierce out there, who the Broncos have been heavily linked with. That was always the guy that it seemed like DJ Reader was the one who was put up in front, the priority number 1 on the defensive line. But Michael Pierce is the other name that has been heavily pushed. He had a down year last year. He actually got sent home from camp for being too overweight, which is not what you want to hear for a guy in a contract year coming to play at altitude. But before that, he was a really good player. Makes a lot of sense in that regard to this scheme. Obviously, Shelby Harris and Derek Wolfe are still out there. Both guys that might make some sense. Ndamukong Suh and Gerald McCoy, both older guys, but potentially guys the Broncos could bring in if they are looking there. There's Damon Harrison, if he wants to continue playing. Mm-hmm. There's Livinell Joseph, who was just released, as an interesting player. There's Timmy Jernigan, who the Eagles brought in. Javon Hargrave, he's still out there. Andrew Billings, and Sean Robinson. So there's so many defensive line names still out there that, while they aren't the splash players, there's something to be said about paying 70%. You're probably going to get better than 70% return compared to Reader with some of these guys. So now it comes down to that second wave of guys, and potentially even guys who will obviously produce better by the dollar, but guys who might outproduce Reader, because again, the system, it matters so much for guys on defense.
Right. And like I said, now the Broncos lost 3 defensive linemen in their rotation, and Gotsis, Wolfe, and Harris. And possibly, they're working on something with Purcell here, so hopefully that gets done here. But so you're talking 3 or 4 guys. You can't just have one and expect him to replace all the production of all those players. And so it was always going to be the Broncos needed at least a couple different guys, and if they can go out there and find a couple like that from that list, 2 or 3 guys, they can maybe sign 3 of them now, and really replenish that defensive line depth. And then go into the draft not really having to reach for a player at that position, because the defensive line draft is not that great. But it's something that they can think about of how they're going to play that. And of course, they want to see how Draymond Jones develops in his second year. Like I said, it's not complete panic time yet. There's still some names out there that can do some pretty good things for the Broncos, not to the level of a DJ Reader, but maybe not to a level of who was the other, the one that went to the Cardinals?
Jordan Phillips.
Yes, Phillips. There you go. And so maybe not quite to that level, but like I said, if you're getting 70% of the production at half the price, not too bad of a deal. So we'll see how that ends up playing out. And it does mean
Pro Football Focus just had a study coming out, which I know Pro Football Focus, a little bit of hit or miss depending on your opinion of them, but they had a study that came out that showed that defenses are much more dependent on the depth of the talent rather than the star players. So the Broncos being able to sign 2 or 3 good players as opposed to just spending it all on one player is probably going to have a better effect on the overall defense. So again, just keep that in mind. It's where offense star players tend to be a bigger difference maker. On the defense, it's about the holistic system and those players on the defense. Yep.
All right. I just had a question come in here from Terry Randall. Really appreciate it. coming in here with a super chat. Asked this last night, but what do you guys think about Chance Warmack after a year off? Drafted by Munchak in the first round, I think. Hashtag state of being.
It's possible, but I think that his lack of tackle ability after signing Glasgow makes it a little bit less. He's a pure guard, so maybe getting somebody like Finney or Remmers who have more versatility, give you a little bit more chances on how you reshuffle that offensive line, make a little bit more sense. But, I could see it. I just think that you bring in a guy to be a pure guard backup, that doesn't make sense because your guards are pretty much set.
Yeah. I'd seen a couple of people ask about some of the tackles that are going to be on the market here. I know I'm trying to think of different ones that are still out there, but Remmers is one I know. But any of those names really stick out to you as guys maybe the Broncos consider to add to the offensive tackle depth?
For me, there's not many tackles. A lot of those guys are already signed. So if you're getting a tackle, it's probably coming out of the draft. That's just how it's shaking up. There's Andrew Whitworth is still out there, but I don't think you're probably going to be able to bring him in. Maybe Jason Peters.
Yeah,
maybe that's something that they still do. But I don't think they will be trading for Trent Williams. However, if it comes down to like a third round pick, maybe that's something they can do. That's going to cost you about $20 million a year.
Yeah.
But I just, which kind of concerns me because he has missed time. But that is something that would interest me. Maybe you could send Garrett Bowles and, the San Francisco third for Trent Williams. And granted, you're going to be paying Trent Williams a big contract, but you can get a solid tackle play for the next 5 seasons. So,
yeah,
again, you're bringing in a more expensive guy with some injury concerns, which is scary in its own way, especially when you got the right tackle over there with similar issues. But there's still options out there to be had if the Broncos do want to go that way. And since they haven't spent that money, they're the pool of those teams that can actually make those moves shrinks, which helps the Broncos from a negotiation standpoint.
Yeah. I think we answered this a little bit earlier. GTZ saying, and what happens with Wilkinson if Glasgow plays right guard? It just means the Broncos have a really nice swing player that can play either tackle spot or either guard spot.
Which they need.
And yeah, exactly. And he's getting paid $2-3 million to do that. Yeah. That's pretty good for your swing player. And I hope they still keep adding to it. But we saw last year, the Broncos had very little depth when it came to the offensive line. Guys that they were having to bring in pretty much off the street to try to get there and start. It was bad. And got kind of covered up there a little bit just because Drew Lock was able to escape the pocket some at the end of the season. But beyond that, it just, again, the Broncos need to, it's not just that they need to add to the starting unit, they need to add to the backup unit too.
Yep. And you're going to need 7 guys that you're going to see something out there. 3.25 also.
Thank you, Simon Fox. Appreciate that.
I see that Bills just signed Quentin Jefferson. So there goes one of the from Cody Damron. So
yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for keeping us updated because we're trying to get through your questions and it's hard to follow on Twitter everything that's going on. So yeah, if you guys see anything,
Jason Peters is collecting Social Security. I appreciate that one.
Probably
I needed that one. He's still really good, and tackle play is very much based on the technique. He's still got a lot of tools there, so I definitely think that would be interesting to maybe kick the tires there, but we should sign Randy Gredshar for LB. Hey, maybe he'd finally get in the Hall of Fame then. But
I would take that.
So yeah, we should shift focus a little bit. We talked about a little bit the defensive line. Now we should shift it probably to the cornerbacks. There's still a good amount out there, and the Broncos are still looking at cornerbacks. Obviously, it'd be Brian Greenfield here, bringing up Desmond Trufant. That is an interesting name. He was in the same class. Where did Trufant go to school? Is that Washington? I believe he was my cornerback 1 that season. The same class as Xavier Rhodes as well. So there are names out there for cornerbacks that Broncos can still pursue. I know somebody that apparently there's been some interest with is Nickel Roby, who I believe was also the cornerback who got that flag that maybe shouldn't have been a flag against the Vikings. Is that correct? Maybe I'm mixing those up. He was the one that was in maybe a little bit controversial call with that Saints, not the Vikings, the Saints-Rams game a couple years ago.
Okay.
So because they can review flags.
But, that's right. Yeah, that might have been.
So I think it was Nickel Roby or Roby Coleman, excuse me.
Yeah.
But that would be interesting. There's still a lot of guys out there. I don't think Logan Ryan makes the most sense just because he is a purely slot bound guy. He had a lot of tackles last year, but I don't know if he has the coverage ability that they're looking for from that slot back. Did Denard get signed?
I don't think he has.
So that's a name that has been brought up a few times as well.
Right. Brian Poole.
Yes.
So he's still out there.
Obviously, and Prince Umukamara is one that makes a lot of sense. So there's still a good amount of cornerbacks and defensive linemen on the market. Now, are they these big, massive level contracts that are going to be these, A+ players, the guys that you're going to see jerseys down at the team store? Probably not. But again, that's fine. If you miss out on those guys, you typically don't want those guys coming through free agency. You want those guys being drafted and then re-signed. So get your Justin Simmons jersey, I guess is what I'm saying. Get your Cortland Sutton jerseys. But that's where we're at right now in this draft class, this free agency class, which again, coming into it is disappointing considering how hyped up we talked about. A lot of people talked about it in regards to the Broncos going to have a lot of cap space as the team on the rise. They can attack free agency pretty well. The market, I still think the market is considering that the cap did not go up that much. I'm still surprised we're seeing so many record-breaking deals, because typically you see those with inflation of the cap, and the cap did not go up that much. But it's disappointing in the moment. But I think when we're looking back on it, it's not going to be the worst thing.
Angela Hilavka, hopefully I said that right.
You nailed it.
Coming in here with another super chat. Really appreciate it. Supporting, and we really appreciate those supports. Like article, that summary where we are with the cap, including draft class plus emergency money for Denver, and who would fit into the budget. Yeah, that'd be a great article. Maybe I'll work on that right after this. Usually our guy Bob Morris is the guy that usually is our cap guy.
Cap
so
guru.
I might talk to him and see if that would be something he'd be interested in, because he's usually really, really good with that stuff.
Also out of house, but Nick Corte, I believe is Korte, who works for Over the Cap, and he's really exceptional with the cap and comp picks as well. So every single free agent signing, he's equating it to compensatory picks. So he's worth following and seeing what he has to say as well.
Yep. And there's going to be a lot of players that can fit within that budget. Let's see. Buwana Beast. Please, Carl and Nick, tell the people why Logan Ryan is not an option. I beg.
He's smart. He can tackle. He can blitz. I think he's going to get paid more than what the Broncos are looking for. And I think that he's an interesting player at this point. I just think that they're looking for a little bit more speed on that from that cornerback spot there. Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, he's a pure slot player at this point. It really depends on what they're going to do with Bryce Callahan. Yeah. Honestly, is Bryce Callahan going to be a boundary player, which was the plan going into the season, or is he going to be a slot player like he was with the Bears? It's really hard to say. It's really just speculation. Unless I could call Ed Donatel right now. I don't got him on speed dial anymore since the incident, but I'm just whatever that means. But so it really depends on what they're going to think about Callahan. But there's plenty of cornerback options still out there, especially for a solid, second, third, fourth kind of guy. So We'll see what they do. And I still think Kamara is going to come.
Something to keep in mind with Logan Ryan, he had 20 missed tackles this last year.
But he had 100 tackles from slot as well. So really he was playing that kind of
I understand. I'm just saying that was his worst year tackling. And so you have to decide, is that an anomaly or is that what's going to be part of the future just because he has lost a step and maybe that's playing a part in that kind of thing. So there's a lot that always plays into why a player has a drop off from one season to the next. I mean, we're talking about Michael Pierce. Is he going to be 2018 Michael Pierce? Because if he is, then that could be a huge bargain for the Broncos that plays way above what he is. Or if he's 2019 Michael Pierce, then there's a reason that he was being let go by the Ravens. So it is. It's just really hard to tell who's going to be the bounce back player, who's not. Yeah.
So we'll see. And again, free agency in the moment, it's fun to talk about. I see a lot of people frustrated in the comments. We've got some angry reacts here in the chat, K in the chat, or for everybody being a little bit upset there, but or R in the chat, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
But I think, again, the biggest steps, the biggest improvements the Broncos are going to get this year isn't from signing free agents. It's from what they're going to get from the 2007 or 2018 and 2019 classes taking steps forward. Yep. So, I mean, Cortland Sutton could take another step still. Deshaun Hamilton, there's still some hope there. Obviously, Bradley Chubb is going to be back. That's going to be a huge boon. Second year in the system, too, which is another thing. And then you got big steps this next year. I mean, Dalton Reisner, for as good as he was last year, he should take a step forward next year. Mm-hmm. You should see a step from Noah Fant. I mean, last year you saw the explosive plays, you saw the potential, but you see a big step from tight ends year 2, year 3. So, and obviously, Drew Lock for a full season should be a big difference. That changes the scheme dynamic, everything. So
Right.
yes.
Glenn Hauser coming in here. Why haven't they signed Prince yet?
I think Prince is probably the reason that it's being dragged a little bit. Honestly, I think Prince is probably going to see how the market works for him. I have nothing to base this on. I'm just pulling it out of my rear end. But I think that's probably the most interesting area to look at right now. So it makes sense for him to wait and try to maximize because this is probably his last decent contract.
Yeah. Terry Randall coming in with another donation here. Really appreciate it. Could Elway be waiting to cut Flacco so he has more money to get Simmons on a long-term deal? Hashtag Nick's Beer Fund. Stay safe, Broncos country. My wife today, she texted me. She goes, "Hey, can we go buy some Guinness? It is St. Patrick's Day." And she's like, "I want to drink a beer with you." Which my wife she hates beer. So I was really shocked that she would say something like that.
Are you a fan of Guinness?
I don't mind it. I like darker beers, so that fits well with what I like. But
have you had many coffee stouts in your day? What's your favorite?
I don't know.
You don't have a go-to?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I just gotta show up and somebody says, "What kind of beer you like?" I'm like, dark beer. They're like, "Hey, try this one. It's usually pretty good."
Okay.
I'm not a connoisseur yet.
So we'll talk some more beer later. We don't want to bore the chat there.
All right. But yeah, to the actual why they might be waiting to cut Flacco so they have more money. I mean, that'll be part of it. That money will be going towards. I mean, it's going to be going towards a lot of things. You could either say that is the money that goes to Simmons, or you could say it's the money that they use for the draft class. However you want to put it. But I do think they want him to be a post-June 1st cut.
Yeah.
Because it does open up more cap space that they can then move over to next season if they want to do that, or they can spend it this year. The Broncos really like to have leeway as they go throughout the year to either sign players or to re-sign players.
Yeah, and I do want to – this is an interesting comment here. Elway might be a little gun-shy from Brian Weatherwax here. Might be a little gun-shy last year after free agency with Juwan James, Bryce Callahan, and Theo Riddick. Do you think that's at all a possibility? I mean, we have a new cap guy here, so there's a different dynamic going on. The Broncos, let's call it as it is. I mean, there's an impending sale coming on, and the state of the economy, I mean, who knows what that means for the Broncos being able to sell. There's a lot of factors here that I think play into it. The Broncos do have cash to spend, but I mean, there's some stuff to talk about here that I don't think going into it doesn't really seem worthy talking about, but more of a retrospective analysis here. I'm going to throw in some epidemiology terms there. That might make sense.
I would say yeah, you would hope that Elway and them learn from their past mistakes. Signing a bunch of guys that are injury prone, that all of a sudden become injured. And this isn't the first year that this has happened. I mean, they've signed a lot of offensive linemen hoping that they could get that guy at that bargain price that somehow it stops being injured.
Yeah.
And they keep getting injured. And so that's part of why the Glasgow signing is so great, is this is that first time that they've really dedicated big money to a guy that has been about as consistent as any offensive lineman in football. And so I do see a change there, but I don't think Elway has always operated with this. I have a number in mind, and once that number is hit, I'm done. He's always operated that way. There's very few players that he has ever gone above that kind of number. Von Miller was one that, I mean, and that was going to happen no matter what. You're going to sign a guy like Von Miller. I'm trying to think of some others that they've really gone above and beyond what they were really thinking they would have. But so yeah, Elway's usually one of the more disciplined people when it comes to free agency. He usually makes one big splash signing every year, and then kind of most of the rest of them are pretty low key guys. Now last year, actually, you could say was probably the second most big signings that he's ever made, with signing Kareem Jackson, Joe Flacco in a trade, obviously Juwan James and
Bryce
Callahan. I mean, I don't know how it wasn't really that big of a contract in the grand scheme of things, but yeah, I mean, it was kind of his biggest year since 2014, and it busted big time, unfortunately. And so I'm sure this year that they are trying to be a little bit more frugal on some things and just stay back to where they were disciplined and try to build an entire roster and not just hope that these splash signings really pay off.
Yeah. So I guess, Carl, just a little bit while you're looking over the questions here, what would you say is the most shocking thing that has happened in free agency so far for you? It doesn't just have to be the Broncos.
I would say a few of the offensive tackles and some of the money they've gotten. I mean, I guess it shouldn't shock me, but when you're talking about some of these guys that there was one, I think Detroit signed him. Big V, is that what he wants to be called?
H. Violi Maitai.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. But he's played 4 games, or he started 4 games over the last 2 years and got a 3-year, $30 million contract. You're talking about George Foster, a guy that had one really decent start, and that was about it this last year. And he's getting 3 years, $30 million. Again, it shouldn't shock me. What?
You mean Fant? George Fant?
What did I say?
Foster, who was the Broncos tackle from
Sorry. Yeah, George Fant. That's who I meant. And so, again, some of those guys, it's amazing the money that they throw out there. And this is why when you look at the draft, I do think offensive tackles are going to always be overdrafted. They're like, you have quarterbacks that get overdrafted. I think offensive tackles are that next level because you just see these contracts that are getting handed out that are just astronomical for average talent.
I mean, Garrett Bowles, compared to the league average that people pay for offensive tackles, might actually be getting return on investment. Not on the draft slot, not on the 20th overall pick, but in terms of just that contract compared to what these other guys are getting paid. I mean, that's as crazy as that sounds from a pure dollars and cents standpoint. You might be actually getting a decent return on that because the tackle market is stupid.
Why in the world did I forget this? The trades for wide receivers.
Oh, yeah.
That's been really the shock. The fact that maybe the best wide receiver in football gets made. It wasn't even a second round value, in my opinion, because you're trading for Houston should have got more because they traded for a contract more than a player.
Not a good one. Yes.
Yeah, not a good one. And they only get a second. And then how in the world does Diggs fetch a first round pick? Like he's a good receiver, but he's not first round eligible, in my opinion. Like when we were talking about it for the Broncos, for me, I'm good with a third round pick. I'd be good with that. I mean, he's got a
second easily.
You would have given up a second? Yeah. I like Diggs a lot, but it just, but again, at first round, no, I'm sorry. You're not taking my top 15 pick. And I understand the Bills didn't have a 15th, but 23rd is not
22nd.
big. 22nd, 23rd, somewhere in there. 22nd, you're right. Patriots have the 23rd.
Yeah. And I guess the question for that, for you in that regard is, what does that say about the Bills looking for wide receiver and the drop-off from the big three, Judy, Ruggs, and Lamb, and the next tier, which I would say would be Rager, potentially Higgins, Mims, and Jefferson.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they could have gotten any of those guys at 22, but they're definitely missing out on that big three. Does that say to them that, there is a tier? Because everybody keeps touting how good this draft class is. But I think those big three, there is a difference.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we keep talking about why the Broncos taking one in the first round is not a bad thing. You take an A-plus player, even though it's a deep position. If it's an A-plus player, you still take an A-plus player instead of a B-plus that's going to be there in the second round.
Unless they're running back.
Yeah. Always that exception that you have to throw in there. But so yeah, it's why it would not shock me one bit if the Broncos made the decision to trade up.
Yep. So definitely shocking.
Yeah.
So guys, we're going to take some more questions here, but we got about not too much longer left. So we got to get going. Chad gave us strict instructions to not go over. So Chad's probably watching right now and shaking his head because he doesn't like me giving him a hard time over here when he can't defend himself. But got a question here from Brohemoth13. Man, what a name. A lot of debate about patience versus big splashes. Boye and Glasgow replace Harris and McGovern. I would say actually probably Harris and Leary, honestly. But are we improving the team or are these moves a wash? Catching up to KC might require some risks. And again, I've talked about it multiple times on here. These moves are good because they are negating holes, and you do not want to go into the draft with holes. And I would say that you're while getting, I would say McGovern, or definitely getting Glasgow is an improvement to McGovern. But Harris from Boye, Harris is at, what is it going to be this year? 31, 32? And Boye is 28. So you're just changing the window there. Because while Harris was still good last year, he's still going to be good for a few more years. Boye might have been injured last year, and just the data says that he should have 2 more good years where Harris could fall off a cliff here very soon. If not, he might have to move to safety, honestly. Right. So it's interesting. It's going to take a little bit of luck to catch up to KC this offseason. Honestly, most of it's going to come down to these coaches, the scheme, how much they're going to be able to develop and everything there. And then Drew Lock. I mean, it is what it is. But That is interesting. Oh, we got some updates here. BJ Finney to Seattle. So there's an interesting name off the board. Yeah. And I saw maybe Vernon Butler to the Bills as well. I'm trying to stay off my phone here for you guys, folks. So I'll see what's happening in a second.
Yeah. All right. Brian Greenfield coming in with another super chat. Really appreciate it. Most shocking is Texans lost their minds overpaying Roby and giving away Hopkins.
And then Cobb. That Cobb deal was trash.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Bill O'Brien is trash. A lot of people here are upset about Elway. You better thank your lucky stars that Bill O'Brien is not the GM.
Yeah, what trash. Like most of the time, I have the mindset of NFL teams have hired smart people that as much as I question some of their moves, they probably have smarter people than me in their building. I don't question one bit that we could run the Texans better than what Bill O'Brien is doing right now. And it's another sign of why a head coach should never have GM power.
Mike Shanahan proved that as well.
Yeah. He went from Super Bowl to, I mean, he was throwing just monopoly money around left and right. I remember those last few years. We talk about comp picks. He didn't care one lick about those things.
Nope. They're lottery tickets. I mean, the odds of a day 3 guy hitting, but they fill out the roster and they give you maneuverability. So they matter.
Right. But you're right. The Texans and everything they've done for the last 2 seasons has been pretty shocking. And I feel for Watson. That's the only reason that they're competitive is Watson.
Yep.
And Glenn Hauser coming in with another donation here. Appreciate it. How did you guys end up at Mile High Huddle?
Well, I guess I should start here.
Yeah, you got there first.
I was literally just commenting on Facebook. There were some draft articles. I think it was from our own, maybe Chad posted it on Facebook. Maybe it was Eric, Mile High Huddle also. And I was just commenting on there, saying like, oh, here are my thoughts, blah, blah, blah. Just having a chat because it's on Facebook, whatever. And then he wrote back to me like, hey, do you write for anybody? And I said, no, I'm just a football fan. I'm getting my master's degree right now. And he's like, let me message you. And he did. And we worked it out. And he said, come on, maybe we'll try you out here for a month if you're interested and send me something. And that was, that would have been 2017. So here we are now. And then I think Carl and I met via a friend on a forum. And I was like, this guy, Carl, he's a nice guy. He writes well. Would like to bring him on. Did I get you on for the podcast first or was it for writing?
For writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you came on and then Carl and I literally late into the night messaging just BS about the draft and like next year's draft. And I'm sure my girlfriend then now wife, and I'm sure your wife were a little bit probably annoyed by that. Maybe just a little bit of like, gosh, it's 2 a.m. and you guys are talking.
I know. I keep thinking of the State Farm commercials.
Oh yeah.
Who are you talking to? Nick. What's Nick wearing? Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I am good looking. Everybody should watch out. But no, yeah, definitely. That's how we got our start, and appreciate Chad for giving us a platform. And if you ever are curious, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of luck involved, but just write. That's my advice. If you're curious about doing that stuff, just write, put it out there, and
comment on the articles at Mile High Huddle. I promise you, especially Chad reads all of those, and he's looking all the time for new talent out there to bring onto the show. So definitely recommend that. I will put out a little shout out. The website that we did meet at, Sports Hoopla. So if anybody wants to ever come write with us on there, that's kind of where I got the first desire to start writing. I had people kept commenting saying, why aren't you writing for someplace? Because I'd write comments that were like article size
format.
And people would go, I'm not going to read that, Carl. And I'd be like, dang it, why did I spend all my time? But so, yeah, that's kind of how we got connected. And Nick brought me on with Mile High Huddle. I was at Predominantly Orange with some great guys there. Recommend.
I stole you. I'm sorry.
It's okay. They understood. They're good guys. I still talk to all those guys. We've had them on the show. Mm-hmm. So all of us are really connected guys in this. And it's a lot of fun. And this is always a lot of fun with all of you guys. So really appreciate it. A couple more comments here, and then we'll get out of here, though. From Justin Leak Leader. Let me know. Leak Leader. Okay. Would like a reunion with the rest of Denver's free agents. Well, the way things are going, it wouldn't shock me to see them bring back a couple different guys. I do think Shelby Harris is probably gone. It just sounds like the relationship is really soured on both sides of that one. And he's still looking for some pretty big money. So he might reach a point where he just gets too late to the process and misses out on all the free agency money that's out there. But it really wouldn't shock me with Wolf coming back at this point.
Yeah,
I really think there's a good chance of that one happening. Chris Harris, probably not. But
I think that a lot of these guys feel a little bit of bad blood in regards to it getting to this point and not being approached and not feeling that love. I mean, as much as it sounds petty, it is a business, but there's a little bit of middle school, high school relationship stuff going on where, if you didn't pay attention to me, now I'm mad and I'm going to show you off or show you up. So I think the Broncos will probably go elsewhere, and maybe they can play the contract game where they can get back comp picks for those guys. So we'll see. In the end, it's a little bit dangerous because there's no guarantees on how that'll work with a new CBA, but it definitely is an interesting area.
Right. Will Parks, it sounds like there's quite a few other teams interested in him, so we'll see if that one happens. But I do know the Broncos have interest. I know the Broncos have offered him a couple different deals, and he would like to come back to the Broncos. I do know that. So we'll see if that ends up happening here at the end. But sometimes it is the patience ends up happening where you end up these guys getting back with the Broncos. Let's see. All right. Can we get one more?
And guys, I saw a lot of draft comments in here, trying to really keep it free agency today, but we got some time here between now and the draft. We will definitely get over every single comment thing, idea, concept that revolves around the Broncos in the draft, including, we didn't even talk about the Buckner trade with the Colts and the 49ers now being at 13. So, and now the Raiders are filling some needs, cornerback, linebacker. Maybe that brings them more in the wide receiver market. So we'll definitely talk about this once this landscape kind of settles.
Exactly. But all right. I'm trying to think. Got a couple more just on Wolf. Glad Wolf hasn't been plucked up from Brian Weatherwax yet. Think he isn't getting the offers that he thinks he deserves. And if I'm Elway, I would give him a solid 3 years offer, 3 for $27 million, 16 guaranteed.
You might be able to get him even less than that.
Yeah.
Honestly. I mean, from what I've heard, it sounds like he is getting the less of the market because of the injury concerns. So who knows what it's going to be. But that's a guy. And again, I saw somebody said Vernon Butler got signed, Quentin Jefferson got signed. So the market's diminishing a little bit, but there's guys still out there for the Broncos. So again, if the Broncos walk out, 4 more signings, Prince Amukamara, Michael Pierce, Derek Wolfe, and Mike Remmers. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
They're ready for the draft. Obviously, would you like a star linebacker that can cover? Yes. Would you like a better tackle to displace Bulls? Probably. Yes. But no such thing as a perfect roster. The most important thing from this point on is filling the holes that they have on this roster right now, which honestly, they have 1.5 on the defensive line. Draymond Jones is a guy. Don't sleep on him. I think he's going to be a guy that's put in a position to succeed next year, but I think that's the biggest thing.
Exactly.
So anything you want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, I think we covered most of it. Like I said, show some patience and let's just see what happens over the next, especially few days here and see what's going to be the full picture of this free agent class. Yep.
I definitely agree with you there. And King Stacy, don't tease us. Say breaking news, ! Oh, the Bucks looking to sign Antonio Brown. Interesting with Tom Brady. They already have Chris Godwin. I don't know, whatever that means. We'll see what happens there. I know that, I think, who is it? Bruce Arians did work with Antonio Brown before, but I don't know how much that crosses. But anyway, guys, thanks for joining us today to talk about this and the crazy life, get a little bit of normalcy back here. We'll be here back next Tuesday again to talk some more draft, some more free agency. But you can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Go on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Go to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment. And make sure you're following the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio shows by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast, wherever you listen to your shows, or just joining us here for these live sessions. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. Carl, Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos. I wish we had a little bit more exciting things to talk about in regards to the Broncos signings, but a week from now, the picture is going to be much more clear. So we're going to see what happens. So thank you guys for joining us. We really, really do appreciate it. And we will see you guys next week. Yeah. Anything you want to leave did you hit end?
Go Broncos.
Go Broncos. There you go.